Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call this meeting to order. This is the joint subcommittee of Ways and Means and Senate Finance on Public Safety, Natural Resources, and Transportation. Madam Secretary, with that, will you take the roll?
Senator Brooks,
Here.
Senator Dennis,
Here.
Senator Dokchia,
Here.
Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno, Assemblywoman,
Here.
Assemblywoman Peters,
Here.
Assemblywoman Titus,
Here.
Assemblywoman Tools,
Here.
Assemblyman Watts,
Here. Here.
Madam Secretary? Broadcast?
Chair, this is broadcast. We're looking into it.
Okay, thank you.
So, we sent the president's bill on, debt collection thing with, the one where
This was
MJ.
in my trap this morning. We're gonna skin it.
It's getting a little out of hand. I think, the MJ dropped that.
You're not muted, Robin.
Everything should be fixed. We should be able to continue the roll call. Apologies, Chair.
last name is Chair Miller.
Yes, I am here. Madam Secretary, do we have anyone absent? I wasn't keeping track.
No, no one folks.
Okay, great, thank you. Before we open up our presentations today, I just want to remind the public that we will be taking public comment at the end after the presentations. And so you may register by going on to the agenda on Nellis. And there is an access link there provided so that you can go ahead and link in if you're interested in making public comment at the end of today's hearing. So with that, we have a few different agencies that are presenting today: water resources, forestry, and Nevada natural heritage. So first up today, we have Ms. Fairbanks and Mr. Sullivan, I believe, from water resources. And we are ready whenever you are, whenever you'd like to begin.
Good morning, Chair Miller and members of the committee. My name is Adam Sullivan. I'm the acting Nevada State Engineer, and we will be providing a presentation with an overview of our executive budget. So again, I'm the acting Nevada State Engineer, which serves as the principal administrator of the Division of Water Resources. And with me is Micheline Fairbank, Deputy Administrator of the Division, and we will be both providing this presentation today and available for questions afterwards. So just to provide an overview of the Division of Water Resources, the division's mission is to conserve, protect, manage, and enhance the state's water resources for Nevada's citizens through the appropriation and reallocation of the public waters. All water belongs to the public, and the work that we do to administer the resource on behalf of the public is governed by Nevada water law, which is NRS chapters 532 through 540. Water law was established early in the 20th century, and while there have been additions and some modifications over the years, the core procedures and the intent haven't changed much since 1913 for the appropriation and adjudication of public waters, and since 1939 for groundwater administration. We now have about 95 people in our staff and offices in Carson City, Las Vegas, and Elko, and as well as satellite offices in Winnemucca and Eureka. So this is showing a summarized list of what we do on a regular basis. We appropriate and manage the use of Nevada's waters through water rights administration, with the exception of the Colorado River, which is overseen by the Colorado River Commission and managed by the Southern Nevada Water Authority to serve municipal rights for its 7 member agencies. We adjudicate claims of pre-statutory vested rights and Federal Reserve water right claims. We manage the distribution and the regulation of state decreed water rights. And what I mean by this is that our staff go out and open and close head gates to deliver irrigation water in accordance with rotation schedules and priority dates. We're in the process of updating the state water plan and the drought response plan, and this is in cooperation with a number of others. We regulate the drilling of all wells, and we license well drillers and provide continuing education. We administer Nevada's dam safety program and the floodplain management program in cooperation with federal requirements and local communities. We regulate aquifer storage and recovery programs, effluent reuse, and we collect and we compile water level data and water use data statewide and make it publicly accessible. We also review subdivision plans for long-term water availability and water conservation plans for small communities. So with that brief overview of the scope of what our division does, I will now turn it over to Micheline to discuss our executive budget.
Good morning, members of the committee. My name is Micheline Fairbank, and I'm a Deputy Administrator with the Division of Water Resources. We appreciate this opportunity to provide an overview of the division's governor's recommended budget for the 22-23 biennium. While the Division of Water Resources collects revenue in the form of fees, as provided for in NRS 533-435, the division is predominantly a general funded agency, with a small percentage of our overall revenue coming from non-general funded resources. All fees that are collected by the division are a component of the state general fund, and there is no correlation between the fees collected by the division and our executive budget. Over the biennium, the division's general fund appropriations total approximately $7.5 million in fiscal year 22 and $7.4 million in fiscal year 23 for a total appropriation of $14.9 million over the biennium. The remainder of the division's revenue consists of our FEMA CAP grant that supports the division's flood management program, and which is funded at approximately $103,000 per year. The FEMA Dam Safety Grant that supports the division's dam safety program for approximately $74,000 a year, and the DOE grant, which the division is a subrecipient of, for a total of approximately $250,000 in year 1 and $260,000 in year 2. Additionally, as I will discuss in more detail later, the governor's recommended budget includes revenue transfer of approximately $667,000 in year 1 and $687,000 in year 2 from the division's non-executive BASIN revenue accounts. The 22-23 governor's recommended budget supports in whole and part of the division's 72 classified positions and unclassified general funded positions. So the Division of Water Resources budget expenditures are predominantly to support the staff who perform the many critical duties and responsibilities of the division. The staff of the division is the heart and soul of our agency. And candidly, the staff that we work with are some of the best people that I've had the pleasure of working with in my time as working in state government. The next most significant component of the division's expenses is the actual operation costs for the division, including our overhead expenses, which total approximately $880,000 per year. The most other significant component of the division's budget consists of other expenses, which include the division's cost allocations, such as the AG cost allocation, which is approximately $660,000 in year one and $350,000 in year two, statewide cost allocations, and other cost allocations. The division's budget also includes approximately $220,000 a year to support stream gauging throughout the state. This is a collaborative effort with the United States Geological Service and is important to the division's ability to monitor stream flows statewide as part of our overall water resource management. The remaining components of the division budget are proportionally minimal, but extremely important to us as a division. The division's out-of-state and in-state travel totals only 1% of our overall budget, but represents much more and is an incredibly significant component for our ability to fulfill our mission. The division's out-of-state budget was swept in its entirety, leaving the division with zero out-of-state travel funds for the coming biennium. Out-of-state travel is critical to support the division's collaborative work with our colleagues throughout the Western United States. Specifically, the division is actively involved with the Association of Western State Engineers and the Western States Water Council. The Association of Western State Engineers is an association of water resource administrators throughout the Western United States, and the Western States Water Council is an organization of representatives of our Western states appointed by the state's respective governors. Both of these organizations are expected to resume in-person meetings this next calendar year, and the ability to travel and meet with our colleagues throughout the Western United States is critically important to our collaborative efforts to manage our water resources. As we face similar challenges and we face similar barriers in terms of what we're trying to accomplish with respect to water resource management. Additionally, out-of-state funding is important and necessary to allow our staff to travel to trainings that are not otherwise available in state and are not expected to continue in a virtual format in the coming years. But I wish to also note that the division has been working with the governor's finance office regarding the restoration of these travel funds, and it would be incredibly important for us as a division to have those funds restored. For the divisions, in-state travel was reduced from nearly 42,000 to 35,000 per year over the biennium. Additionally, in-state travel is critically important to support the mission and core functions throughout the state, particularly as we resume normal operations in the coming months. Over the past year, the division did not engage in much of the necessary field work, and our in-state travel was much less. Consequently, as the division enters this next biennium, frankly, we're behind. We have gaps in data resulting from our inability to perform certain field work during the COVID-related lockdown, and we have a growing backlog of necessary and essential field work to be performed throughout the state. Additionally, we as a division, we continue to face significant complaints and criticism regarding the absence of us and our staff being out in the field more regularly and not having as much face-to-face engagement in our rural communities. So that's an important component for us as well, is to be able to build those relationships and be able to travel and spend time in our various basins and in our rural communities to assure that we're building those types of relationships. And under Mr. Sullivan's leadership, he's committed to increasing our field presence and engagement in our rural communities and rural basins so that we can have more regular contact with water users, rural government entities, and other tribal organizations and other groups, so that we can make sure that we're engaging in that face-to-face and communication. Finally, we'd like to note that the governor's recommended budget includes approximately $32,000 a year for the maintenance of the South Fork Dam. It's important for us to note that this $32,000 only supports the actual operation of the dam during the year, which includes utilities, supplies, as well as $23,000 a year to pay for the stream gauging at the dam. We need to emphasize that this expense category does not include funding for ongoing maintenance of this 30-plus-year-old dam, which is necessary. And we've been working with the governor's finance office with respect to a budget amendment to support needed repairs at the dam that we're currently in the process of investigating and determining what those needs will be. And that's essential for maintaining the safe operation of the dam. So with revisions to our budget in response to the realities of the economic impacts due to the pandemic, the division has made efforts to answer the governor's call for us to identify where budget reductions can take place. Unfortunately, as we explained in the prior slide, nearly 80% of our budget constitutes people. The other expenses of the division beyond our staff leave very little value in cutting what little funding we have. And we actually don't accomplish much in terms of making a meaningful impact towards budget reductions by making those cuts. As such, staff salaries are really the one area in which the division can achieve budget reductions. However, those reductions come with a significant cost to us as an agency. So our recommended budget includes 4 separate enhancement units for the purpose of achieving these targeted budget reductions. The first of these is E681, which leaves an existing engineering technician position vacant until January 2023. This is a staff vacancy within our division's titles and deeds processing section, and is a more senior position within the section. Leaving that position vacant will reduce the efficiency of that program section in processing, reviewing, and confirming reports of conveyance. These are documents relating to the changes of ownership of water rights, and it's expected that existing backlogs will grow and the time to process these reports of conveyance will take longer. Next to our E682 and 683, which involve leaving 2 positions, a professional engineering position and an associate engineering position, vacant again too through January 2023. And these 2 positions are within the division's adjudication section. These vacancies will greatly impact the division's productivity with respect to conjuncting of adjudications of 3 statutory rights. The division's adjudication section presently has 7 positions, 2 professional engineers, 3 associate engineers, and 2 engineering technicians. So leaving these 2 positions will be a significant hardship because we have multiple outstanding adjudications, inactive adjudications, and numerous pending adjudications, or petitions to adjudicate basins. And additionally, there's a December 31st, 2027 deadline for the filing of claims of vested rights with the division. And we fully expect that beginning in 2028, there will be increased expectations and demands on our office to commence and complete adjudications. Presently adjudications take many years and regularly decades to complete. And the continued vacancies in our adjudication section only compounds the time it takes to perform this important work. And these vacancies will certainly just only add to the delay and the time it takes to complete these. Finally, 684 replaces general funds used to support staff salaries with transfer from the division's non-executive basin accounts on a temporary basis. And I'll go into the detail on this in the next slides. But as I've already discussed, because the division's budget is predominantly used to fund staff executing the mission of our agency, we're left with few options beyond leaving position vacant. and we did not have enough vacant positions to satisfy the requisite budget reductions. So in short, as a division, we were faced with a difficult choice of either finding alternative funding sources to support existing staff or to resort to staff layoffs. So our BASIN allocation, BASIN funds are derived from chapters 533 and 534. And as a threshold point, I think it's significant to address that the use of BASIN funds to support classified positions within the division has been done for many years. The positions within the division who support in whole or part BASIN budget fund, supported by BASIN fund transfers, they perform a significant proportion of their work for the benefit of these particular basins. The division's budget without the E684 transfer is approximately $340,000 in year one and $350,000 in year two. And as included in the governor's recommended budget within E684, this transfer will nearly double to $646,000 in year one and $662,000 in year two. So within our budget, we have existing BASIN transfers. And these positions historically and are currently supported with transfer from BASIN funds. These positions include a deputy administrator position within the agency, 2 administrative assistants, an engineering technician, and an account technician. And as you can see on this slide, these positions either wholly or partially funded through the use of these BASIN transfers. The governor's recommended temporary BASIN transfers, as articulated in E684, increase this transfer to support 5 existing positions who perform at least a majority of their duties for the benefit of these supported basins. These positions include 2 manager 2 positions, which are professional engineering positions, and a section chief and a supervising professional engineer position. Each of their responsibilities include the supervision of water commissioners who administer decreed water rights throughout the state, as well as supervising the work and provide support to well supervisors directly funded through BASIN accounts. Additionally, this transfer includes a GIS 2 position, and this position is essential to the division in providing mapping work throughout the state, including mapping water rights, points of diversion, places of use, and providing other assistance to water commissioners and well supervisors in their mapping needs and administration of their basins and their systems throughout the state. E684 is a temporary transfer and use of these funds and is limited to only the next biennium. The use of these funds will take away from the division's ability to conduct additional field work, studies, and data gathering. And while there's sufficient funding available to support these transfers, the use of these funds is the division's least preferred option and was a last resort to avoid layoffs. So at this time, I'll go ahead and turn it back to Acting State Engineer Sullivan.
So now I'd like to just follow up with some discussion of the specific challenges that we face with regard to budgets, both in the immediate term and also looking out a few years, specifically with the division's ability to serve the public and to manage work expectations. So first, in the short term, I'll reiterate part of what Micheline just said, but we do have a very lean staff under the best of circumstances. So to leave positions vacant does have a noticeable impact on our ability to be responsive to the needs of water right holders. The result of the particular vacancies that we're now holding will affect those water right holders who need to update ownership records and also those who are waiting for adjudication of pre-statutory rights, as Micheline described in some detail. And on that point, I'll skip to the last bullet, the third bullet on this slide. So the deadline for submitting claims of vested right is 2027. And again, as Micheline said, there will be an expectation that the division is responsive to adjudicating those claims that we're receiving approaching that date. And really, to be most effective in meeting the expectation, we want to be building capacity well in advance of that deadline. And at this point, we're not doing it yet. Now back to the middle bullet on this slide. Over the last few years, we've had a lot of retirements, but we have been really fortunate to hire on a lot of new, smart and motivated staff. And so at this point, the state has an opportunity to cultivate new expertise and preserve institutional knowledge for a very complicated subject. And to help facilitate that, we're in the process of making some adjustments in our management structure and reclassifying some positions. One objective is to create pathways for promotion for staff who don't qualify for a professional engineering license, but otherwise have really important skill sets that we need. For instance, in the areas of hydrogeology, in well drilling, in water planning, and a number of other examples. And the second objective a second objective in reclassifying is to reduce staff to supervisor ratios. And now on this last slide, I'd like to mention some of the longer term needs for the division to continue to serve the public well into the future. One area of need is to update the foundational science that we rely upon to make determinations of long-term water availability. Much of the data that we use to understand regional groundwater flow systems and perennial yield is based on USGS studies that are 50 to 70 years old. And not that it's bad science, but it is dated and it's increasingly being challenged. Updating water budget studies using current methods is a critical step. Using this baseline science to understand the long-term water availability really becomes critical to protect existing rights, to protect environmental water needs, and to resolve disagreements before we have water shortages. In part, this effort is ongoing as we have the resources to do it, but it will take some years and a substantial financial investment to fully complete this effort. Secondly, we have a pressing need to modernize some of our internal processes to preserve historic records, to digitize our files, and enhance our use of technologies that can help us work smarter. We're running out of space for paper records, and the accumulating history of decisions can too easily be overlooked when addressing immediate questions. So we've made a number of really positive improvements in recent years with GIS, with digital access to files, and providing more services through our website. But we still have a continued need to enhance these capabilities, again, to preserve these historic records and make it publicly accessible. On the last bullet, our dam safety program helps dam owners be aware of at-risk infrastructure and emergency responses. As time goes on, we see a need to both enhance our services to keep up with federal design standards and safety guidelines, as well as assist dam owners in addressing hazards and getting access to federal grant funding or other sources of assistance to either maintain or remove aging facilities. The structural integrity of aging dams creates a public safety liability, and maintenance can too easily be deferred. So these are some important examples of long-term needs that we anticipate going forward for our division. And with that, we'll conclude the presentation, and we are available for any questions.
Thank you so much. We actually do have members that have a few questions. First, to begin, Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you so much for the detailed presentation. I have a few questions about, or a question about E681, 682, and 683. In your slide presentation on page 6 and 10, you talked about the vacancies, but could you just discuss with us it's a little more detail how the backlogs in the titles and adjudication section will impact you if the recommended vacancies go forward? How would that impact your backlog?
Well, currently with our deed section, we have we are in a good position, and our backlog is manageable. But to hold one position vacant would reduce our staff by about, I believe it's one position out of 4. So we would reduce our capacity by a 1/4, and over time that will just be a proportional. Will have a proportional effect on our ability to keep up with the requests by members of the public and water right holders to update their water rights title records. With regard to the adjudications section, so we're talking about leaving 2 positions vacant, which reduces our staff from 7 to 5. We do have about 14 active adjudications that we're working on now. And there are about approximately 20 petitions to adjudicate additional basins. As we discussed, approaching the deadline for 2027. This limits our ability to get ahead of the workload, and consequently, it puts us behind the curve in being able to provide this important function. Adjudicating pre-statutory water rights is one of the really fundamental purposes of this office, going back to its creation in 1903. So I see that as a significant, having those 2 positions vacant is a significant impediment to accomplishing that responsibility.
Madam Chair, I just have a follow-up.
Yes,
I may
please.
have missed it in the presentation, and please forgive me if I did. These are current vacancies. How long have they been vacant?
So the deed section became vacant at the beginning of December. So the titles and deed section, that position was vacant at the beginning of December. The professional engineering position in our adjudication section has been vacant for approximately a year, but we were holding it vacant because it's a critical component of the reorganization and reclassification that Mr. Sullivan was discussing. And again, sorry, Micheline Fairbank for the record. And so that position has been held vacant, but we were in the process of trying to prepare ourselves to be able to fill it in a different manner. And then when we were requested to make or look at budget reductions and anticipating budget reductions, we exercised some, restraint, recognizing that we didn't want to put ourselves in even worse position. The staff engineer position has been only vacant for several months. It became vacant due to an internal promotion of that employee. And so again, with the requested need for additional agency budget savings, we elected to keep that position open, anticipating this very circumstance.
Thank you so much for the answers, and thank you, Madam Chair, for allowing the questions.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. Next, we have Senator Dennis.
I have a question on E684, and you addressed this in your presentation a little bit, but I want to go a little deeper, I guess, about the funding source change. So you made a determination that you're going to change the funding from general fund to allocation from the water district assessments. And first of all, I guess I want to understand how you got to that determination that you could do that, considering you got a statutory requirement to use those funds in the particular water basin that you collect the revenues from. So can you talk a little bit about that, how you got to that
Ashley Fairbank for the record. Um, So with respect to those particular positions, so those positions are allowed to be, we made the identification based upon the type of work that these particular positions do. So within the statutory, within NRS 534, I believe it's 140, we have the statutory authority to employ water commissioners and assistants to perform the work to support those particular basins. So as we have existing positions that are classified positions that do work on a statewide basis, but a significant portion or a proportional percentage of their work is specific to the benefit and support of those individual basins, we made a determination to look at what other positions within the office would qualify within that construct. And so that construct being who does work that directly and specifically supports the administration and the work performed in those individual basins. And so based upon that, these particular positions that we identified in E684 are positions that directly monitor, supervise, and conduct work within and support the work performed by those individual basins. So whether that may be reviewing applications to appropriate water, change applications to appropriate water, and working with the specific basin engineer assigned to that basin to do the analysis and perform their particular functions, to identify conflicts, to perform hydrologic analyses, to review that work that's being done. That's what these particular positions do, is they are directly and intricately supportive of the work that's being done in those particular basins. And so based upon that is where we found that, just as we have those other positions, that we made the determination that these positions are performing work specifically to support those basins. And so that was how we came to those conclusions.
So you have like the chief of the hydrology section, right? I would assume that he does work for all the basins, right?
Correct. But
so how are you going to?
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
So if that's and you have the same thing like you mentioned the GIS analyst in your presentation. I'm assuming he or she does work for that. I mean, for all of the basins. So I guess the question would be then, how are you going to track and monitor that work by the particular basin that's going to benefit from that work? Are you going to have a way to be able to track that?
So we have mechanisms to track it. However, when we do this, we looked at the type of work and the staff in which those particular positions are either overseeing. So using the chief of hydrology as a specific example, many and most of the staff in our hydrology section are well supervisors. They perform work specific to basins that have assessments and that are doing hydrologic analysis with respect to the management of those individual resource water basins. So that particular position supervises the majority of his staff, are basin funded, non-classified employees. And so more than a majority of his time is dedicated to supporting that. Now, while the work that he does also supports statewide functions, it's a proportional share of the work that he's doing is directly to support those assessed basins.
So just so I understand, you're saying that this particular individual supervises other individuals that do have specific responsibility for each one of these basins. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay, but I guess the question I'm asking is because of the requirement in the statute that if you're going to fund it out of those assessments, that you have to, it has to be specific to the region where you collected the revenue from, and so we're just wondering how you're going to track that so that when he works on, whatever basin, are you going to be able to track that, and then. In addition, also I want to talk about the impacts. And by funding it this way, what are the impacts and that occur? And then, are there going to be delays in other work supported by the basin? So in other words, you've got you've identified individuals that do work for the basins, maybe not like the the one you mentioned, the supervisor, he's supervising different ones that have that. But then there's also statewide functions. So is there going to be functions that are going to be that you're not going to do because you're funding it in this particular manner?
Unmute. Yes, Senator Dennis, this is Adam Sullivan for the record. The consequence of using that BASIN funding to support salaries to BASIN funded work means that the funding available for those basins cannot be used for other things that we would prefer to do that would be beneficial, such as collecting more water level data, keeping up with field investigations of that require any additional expenses, continuing with studies to evaluate the water budget or the water availability within that basin, to support travel expenses, to have a continued presence. So it's really a balance of keeping our staff within our agency and having enough opportunity to have a presence and continue the work needed for each one of those basins, and do the baseline amount of work required.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Assemblywoman Toles?
Yes, thank you, Chair Miller, and thanks for the presentation. I want to make sure that I understand this correctly. So we were talking about these 5 vacancies, and I see that we have 2 different points of data before us on slide 7, without E684 and with E684, giving us different allocations. Am I to understand that with the governor's recommended budget, we'll be able to fill those 5 positions, or will those 5 positions still be vacant even with that increased proposal of funding?
Michelle Fairbank for the record. So the positions that we've identified as leaving vacant, so the 3 positions under E681, 682, and 683 under the governor's recommended budget will remain vacant until January 2023. The 5 positions that we're that the governor's recommended budget includes additional BASIN transfers to support the salaries of those positions are currently occupied positions. And so they would remain occupied for the duration of that transfer, the next biennium, but it's a temporary use of those funds.
So I think circling back to some of the questions that Vice Chair Monroe Moreno asked, I just have some real concerns about the backlog and just that we currently have and what impacts those 5 vacancies will continue to have moving forward. Just to break it down on a more fundamental level, we're having all these discussions in this building about the affordability of housing, and that's a supply and demand equation. And I have one development, Stonegate, in my district that has been adjudicating for 6 years now, and 5,000 homes are on hold as a result of that. And so how many more projects like that are we looking at potentially being delayed out years, which impacts the increasing cost of our housing when we're not getting these things approved and getting them through? What are the ripple effect impacts of that?
So you raise very significant concerns that we have as well, and that is, leaving these positions vacant, or not, having the full funding to support all of our positions that we have. That comes at a significant cost to the users that, the public that we serve. So if we leave these positions vacant as proposed, we will continue to have backlogs. That's just the reality. And we have limited staff where, as Mr. Sullivan stated earlier, the best of times, being fully staffed is still not enough. And in the worst of times, it's even harder. So those backlogs, if we can continue to keep these positions vacant, or we're faced with additional vacancies, that will adversely affect our ability to perform our core functions on an expedited basis. That's just the reality of it. We do our best, and we're trying to find better ways to do more with less, but we can't avoid those consequences.
I appreciate that. And I just want to go back to something that you said earlier in your presentation, which is these savings of these 5 positions are actually just, what we call, I guess, budget dust, right? Just a drop in the bucket of the overall budget. But the impact on the citizens of Nevada in housing affordability is huge. So I just have some real concerns about these vacancies and these backlogs and the ripple effects that are much larger than these filling these positions with our budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. Not seeing any additional questions, I'd like to thank you both for your presentation.
I'm sorry.
Excuse me. I'd like to thank you both for your presentation on water resources, and we can go ahead and.
Madam Chair, I have several questions I would like.
Okay, Senator, please, if you have questions, you can always Skype me or send it through Teams. I will make this final exception this one time, but please let's follow the procedures of the committee.
Sorry,
what are your questions?
But yes, and of course this is kind of very near and dear to me, and I have several questions involved. I apologize for not Skyping you. This is not the best, in my mind, the best way to have conduct a committee hearing. But anyway, I'm going to go back to the title and go right back to the start. Title and adjudication. Mr. Sullivan or Ms. Fairbanks, how far behind are you on that? I can pull up any water basin in the state and look at ownership records that I'm familiar with, and see that there are, some of those are 20 years behind.
Michelle Fairbank for the record. Senator Garcia, thank you. It's a little bit difficult specifically to quantify the backlog with adjudications, because there's various reasons why we may have delays. We have there's currently 15 pending adjudications. So there's 15 adjudications that we're working on in various stages of completion. And of those 15, some of them are before the district court for the final final hearings of exceptions. Others we're just commencing, and we're just getting the field work performed, ground truthing information, and those different types of things, all of which takes time to physically go out and investigate each of individual claim that's filed, depending on the location. That can take many years to go ahead and accomplish that type of work, as well as then the historic research. So with regards to our is what we would call kind of the stale adjudications. We have approximately 14 of those stale adjudications, and those have for various reasons, from one time or another, just kind of gotten put on the back burner. And some of those, quite honestly, may have been sitting for more than a couple decades. And if you would like, we'd be happy to go ahead and provide more detail with respect to that. And then, as Acting State Engineer Sullivan had stated, we have approximately 20 pending petitions to adjudicate, either individual stream sources, spring sources, or basins. And that's going to continue to be an ongoing need, because just kind of one of the associated, as Assemblywoman Toles had stated, the ripple effect is part of our application backlog involves pending applications that are dependent on an adjudication being finalized and determined. So that the backlog in terms of quantifying We can give those numbers. There's various reasons, and we're happy to provide that to you at a later point in time if you would like. But you're right, some of them have been stale for quite some time.
And please, if you do, please make sure you submit that to the committee.
We'd be happy to.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, could I follow up? If I may?
Quickly, please.
Yes, thank you. And I've got a number of questions. And again, I just wanted to make sure the committee was aware that this backlog is huge. I think we could double the staff and spend the next 10 years and probably not accomplish it. Now, we've got 99 basins that are technically have been are termed adjudicated, and the other 159 basins are not. You can charge up to $1 an acre foot in a basin in those 99 basins, and the other 159 again have no revenue source in front of them. I'm really concerned about what we're proposing to do and how we're going to try and say, okay, we've got $600,000 and we can spread that out over the 258 basins in the state and accomplish the workload that clearly is in front of you. And so I'm just very concerned how you think you can take, and do you not anticipate you might be challenged the fact that you are taking assessment fees out of that basin it's dedicated to and using it statewide?
This is Adam Sullivan for the record. So when we look at basin funds, it's critical that the use of that funding is tied to what benefits that basin. So as Micheline described earlier, we do have a mechanism for tracking each account. It's important to reiterate that we do that, and we recognize how important that is. A lot of the work that's done in all of these basins is primarily supported by general fund revenues, whether through staff or other resource needs.
You anticipating actually designating more than the 99?
Pardon me, could you repeat that question?
Actually, Senator, I'm going to have this be your last question. For the sake of time, we need to move on. So after this, you can ask the rest of the questions offline. We still have almost a dozen other budgets we need to hear today. So if we could have quickly ask with a brief response, and then I'll have you submit your questions offline.
Madam Chair, do you want me to re-ask the question? I don't know.
Quickly.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And you presently got 99 basins that are designated. Are you anticipating designating more basins so that that basin assessment could be available to?
Thanks, Senator Koikachia. We currently have about 125 to 130, I don't know the exact number, designated basins within the state. Designating a basin is a process that delineates formally what the boundaries of that basin are. It creates requirements. For instance, to drill a well, one must hold a water right prior to drilling the well. And as you point out, that we can't assess water right owners within a basin unless it is designated. So at this time, we are looking at the possibility of, or we've issued some draft designation orders for basins where the commitments exceed the estimated perennial yield, and we've held public hearings on those draft designation orders, but no final action has been taken on those as of yet, and no determination with regard to whether or not an assessment would be required in the future has been made.
Okay, thank you so much. And thank you so much for the presentation. We are going to move on. We have multiple budgets to hear from forestry. So I'd like to welcome up State Forester Fire Warden, Casey, and whomever else you have, you may have presenting with you today. Because there are so many multiple budgets, and we want to make sure that our questions are that none of us get mixed up on which budget and which questions. After each specific budget, we'd like to stop and ask questions if that works. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Casey, State Forester Fire Warden. I'm flying solo today. So I will stop after each budget and you guys are free to ask questions.
We are ready whenever you are.
Working on screen share here.
Looks like the end of the last presentation from Water Resources. There you are.
There I am. Thank you. Sorry, technologically challenged still to this day. You'd think I'd be better at it by now. So the division, thank you again for having me here today to present the division's budget accounts. There are 5 budget accounts. It can be a little bit confusing, so I think it will be best if we stop after each one and discuss. The Division of Forestry's mission, as you may or may not be aware, is to provide professional natural resource and wild and fire management services to the Nevada citizens and visitors to enhance, conserve, and protect forests, rangelands, and watershed values, endangered plants, and other native flora. Our primary statutes reside in 472, 527, and 528 that guide the work that we do. Our vision, which kind of goes real well, obviously, as we are under the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, is to manage healthy and resilient landscapes through public and private partnerships in urban, rural, and wild land areas across Nevada that sustain necessary water supplies, local economies, human health, and wildland habitat for present and future generations of Nevada. The key programs that we run, we have multiple areas that protect, conserve, and enhance. Ones that I am sure you're aware of is our forest, rangeland, and watershed stewardship programs. You'll see a lot of our crews and staff, foresters, and staff specialists out in the field working with private landowners on state and private lands and with our federal partners on trying to implement large-scale restoration, rehabilitation, and mitigation projects. We also have insects and disease programs where we're looking at mortality each year. We fly all the forested areas of Nevada with our federal partners each year to see how we're fluctuating in insect and disease mortality, which obviously has a direct effect on wildfire as it rolls through these areas. In addition to those, some of our lesser known is our urban forestry management program. It's critical that we ensure that our urban areas have trees for human health and for just beautification. So we do work with counties and cities to make sure that we have enough trees to provide that. We, as you know, are also first responders, so we do have wildland fire suppression assets. We do support also in other emergencies as requested through other agencies, Department of Emergency Management or county and local officials for things like earthquakes, floods, or other natural disasters. We support hazardous fuel reduction projects, fire adapted communities. So we're looking at how we get communities engaged in trying to ensure that as they're built or as they're currently designed, that they are trying to ensure that as a fire rolls through there, we can do what we can on the outskirts to try to reduce the impacts as it comes through, but that a home is hardened to ensure that it also is not ignitable as fuel during these wildland fire incidents. We have 2 state tree nurseries and a seed bank that provides conservation plant materials for conservation projects around the state. We also provide conservation education. We work with teachers in classrooms all over the state to try to help students understand the value of protecting natural resources and making sure that we're protecting by statute the endangered and protected flora around the state as listed with the Division of Forestry. The governor's recommended budget for state fiscal year 22 and 23 as a biennial total for the division, it's about almost $76 million. Our general fund makes up about 57% of that at $39 million. This supports 185 full-time staff and 77 seasonal staff who come on primarily for wildland firefighting, but also when we are not fighting wildland fire, are implementing the rest of the mission in forestry work. As you can see, the rest of our funding sources come from either federal funds through grants, primarily fire reimbursements through our suppression accounts and our honor camp projects, and in addition to other interagency transfers agreements we have with the Department of Wildlife, the Department of Corrections, and other agencies as partners. The agency's objective, as we move into, this has been our objective and it maintains our objective, is to maintain the staff necessary to guide current and future natural resources work throughout the state, which includes wildland fire suppression in the highest priorities areas in Nevada. We are confident in the staff that we have. We just don't have a lot of them to do all of the work. It's a large state. And our goal is to maintain and increase those staff. We want to make sure that as we have these staff, we are providing them with the adequate equipment, supplies, and training necessary to safely implement their job. We do train our firefighters to national standards, both inmate firefighters and paid staff. And we want to make sure that they have the national training necessary, but also the internal training necessary. So we have been working for our staff on natural resource training if they're in the fire side to make sure that they have both of those skills, and on the natural resource side, firefighting qualifications. So we work across both to make sure that we adequately can staff the fire issue and the natural resource issue we have in the state. We want to make sure that we can adequately fund wildland fire suppression. As I'm sure you have heard me say many times, that we are our wildland fire issue is increasing across the state. That's actually true across the West and across the United States. There are many reasons for that, but we need to make sure that as we are responding, our response is adequate to deal with the problem that we currently see. Historically, we had focused a lot of our effort on suppression response, making sure that we had enough suppression assets, both at the state, federal, and local government agencies, to make sure that we could address this increasing fire issue. But recently, we have recognized that the way to adequately address this issue is not just with suppression, but also with active management of all of our areas across the state, forests, rangeland, and watersheds, making sure we increase the pace and scale of those treatments. We are working in the highest priority areas across all of our limited budgets and limited staffing, federal, state, local government, picking together those high priority areas and putting all of our efforts in trying to get these large landscape scale breaks, which actually affect how fire moves through those ecosystems. And we want to make sure that our fire staff have a stable funding source to adequately address these issues as we go forward. A few of the accomplishments from 2020, as everyone here knows, 2020 was a tough year for everybody. Our goal was to increase the acres treated. Unfortunately, we were just shy of our average of 5,000 acres treated. That was largely due to sending staff home for a while there, and then also not having shifting staff actually and movement of staff. So we were just shy of our historic average. However, it was a true testament to staff that we got this much accomplished when we sent everybody home in the original stay-at-home order. One of the first goals much of our field going staff had was to get back out into the field. So we worked diligently, our staff worked diligently on getting plans on how we could safely continue to provide this service. And they did get back to work about a month into stay-at-home orders. We started to bring people back into the offices per the governor's directives. And we continue to have staff working in the field safely every day since. So I do assume going into 2021 and 2022, we will see these numbers increase as we have driven back to our mission. We're not doing as much of the community support type work that we had been doing, and we are focused really on those mission-driven projects across the state. We did get quite a few new acres under plans. That's a testament to also staff staying home, so you have a lot more time for the planning process. Our plant materials sold and our seed sold were down a little bit this year. Seed sold is directly down due to fire in the state. We had a low fire year last year, and seed sales are directly correlated to fire seasons. Our plants were due to having the nurseries closed to the public for quite some time as we tried to work through a plan to open them safely for both our staff and for the public coming in. We have opened and we are managing safely for the last about 6 months. So we should see an increase in that as well. One of the other ones I wanted to call a highlight too is our suppression response. As I spoke to you and many of you, as we went into the 2020 fire season, we were worried about ground forces with COVID-19. Many of our local responders were tied up in actual COVID-19 response. And we were worried about having the ground forces necessary to deal with the fire season that we were predicting in the state of Nevada and across the West. In response to that, we did an emergency contract, the Nevada Division of Forestry with Bridger Aerospace for 2 contracted super scoopers, if you will. They were large aircraft custom built for the sole purpose of water delivery on fires. With this asset, we were able to double the amount of water in the initial attack response time on fires in Nevada. So we actually saw an increase in fires in the state of Nevada last year over, it was almost a 50% increase in what we had seen years before. But we actually were very successful in initial attack due to this increase, not only from the state side, but the federal agencies also contracted additional air assets to combat what we might not have initially on the ground. So NDF's 3 helicopters dropped about 365,000 gallons of water on fires. The 2 super scoopers under contract for the duration of the bulk of the fire season dropped about 400,000 gallons of water. Just an example, on the Topsy fire here, it started lightning bust, could have been a large fire, was immediately moving into homes. We dropped 4,000 gallons of water with the scooper scooping out of the Tahoe Basin. It was about a 5-minute turnaround time from scoop to drop in 20 minutes. And we were able to put that fire out within the first couple hours. That would have been a very different story had we not had that asset. One of the nice things about having traditionally air assets are contracted with the federal agencies. One of the values of having a state contracted air asset is it is not a national asset. So we were able to send it to Washington and Oregon when our partner states to neighboring states were seeing significant fire in their areas, but we were also able to pull it back when we were worried about the fire in the state of Nevada, which we cannot do historically under federal contracts. So now I will go into each of our budget accounts and I'll stop after each one as requested to make sure you can ask your questions. The first budget account I will go into is our general forestry account, budget account 4195. This is the budget account which coordinates the bulk of our mission, which is forest, rangeland, and watershed and endangered plant protection activities on qualified public, state, and private lands, working with our state, federal, and local government partners. As we all know, with the land base in the state of Nevada, it requires us to be good partners, both in wild and fire response and in working on natural resource projects. This budget account supports 73 full-time positions and 51 seasonal positions, seasonal firefighter and seasonal dispatch positions. This includes this time a transfer, which I will get to in a moment, out of budget account 4198. And 4, they're not really new. They were added into the division through a work program last session. But 4 NV Energy SB 508 positions. 1 is an accounting position to deal with the money that's coming in. And 3 are foresters to actually help guide the work that's being done on the ground. This budget account is funded by general fund, federal grants, and fees. The primary enhancements, as discussed, were the bringing forward of the 4 NV Energy positions. We did, as you have heard, and I'm sure not just from our agencies, but from everyone, have to make some tough decisions in budget reductions. We are an agency that primarily also funds positions and the operating for such positions, the bulk of which are first responders to wildland fire emergencies. So when we're looking at cuts, we were also having to make sure that we were making those cuts adequately to try to preserve the staff that we had. We reduced uniform allowances. We have in here E710, which is a replacement for general computer hardware, software, radios, chainsaws, repeaters. This is something we have in every year. It's very critical for us to ensure that our staff have communication when out in the field, not just when fighting fire, but when on natural resource project every day. They're often in areas that don't have cell coverage, and we need to ensure that they can safely return from projects. The big one is E805 and E901, which is a transfer out of a camp area supervisor out of budget account 4198 and transitioning that to an education and information officer in budget account 4195. NDF has divided ourselves into 3 regions. Historically, we've operated this way. The camp program had 4 camp area supervisors. So we aligned better the camp program with our general practices for regional management. So the 3 regions have regional leadership in our NDF regional offices from the camp program, the fire program, and the resources. This allowed the 4th camp area supervisor to be shifted into 4195. It's important for us to have a person who assists us with an education and information officer in preparing and presenting education information to communities on the programs that we provide, in trying to get support and participation in these programs. In addition, as we head into emergency response situations, it's critically important for us to get information out timely and ensure that people understand where road closures are, where they should and should not be, what they should be doing during that time. So it's important for us to have somebody that helps us provide that information that's qualified to do so through the program. And with that, I will stop and ask for questions in 4195.
Thank you for that. First up, we have Assemblyman Watts.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the presentation, Ms. Casey. I had a couple of questions on E257, the continuation of those positions. And I was wondering if you could just give a little bit more background. So I know that, you know, the SB 508 is a little bit new. Can you just explain a little bit more about that and the revenue from that? And my particular question is, do you anticipate that the contract with NV Energy to continue the hazardous fuel reduction work will be renewed? And if so, do you expect it to be extended beyond the 2021-2023 biennium?
Thank you for the question, Assemblyman Watts. Again, for the record, Casey. Yes, so I'll give a brief overview. SB 508 was the state's matching fund given to the division, well, it was to the department actually, for fuel reduction projects or resilient landscape projects across the state in high priority areas. The division worked with the U.S. Forest Service and other partners on a couple projects, one in the South Rubies, which is matched. It's a fuel reduction project in the South Rubies, directly matched with the SB 508 funds, and then partnered with NV Energy on the bulk of the rest of what was left in SB 508. The 508 matching was $5 million. Our contract with NV Energy is about $4.8 million. We do anticipate, one of the things we recognize pretty quick is obviously $10 million is a lot more money than the Division of Forestry has had in our budget accounts ever. And so we actually needed an increase in forestry staff to provide the technical assistance to both landowners because we don't have jurisdictional responsibility over private lands. So we need to help them to cooperate, but also to look at how we're going to implement these projects. It's critically important for fuel reduction projects to not create a worse fuel problem than we had before as it comes to fire, as it moves through those ecosystems. So they need to be well thought out and planned. So we worked with NV Energy. They agreed that they also needed the forestry technical assistance. So we put 3 positions. We tried to hire them through a contract service. We looked at the manpower contract through the state. Unfortunately, we did not get a lot of response for people wanting to come into the service for the state through a manpower contract. We did get a lot of support when they became state positions. We did get a lot of applicants and very qualified applicants. I'm happy to say today we are in the midst of our 3rd hire, and I think we're going to have some really qualified people out there helping our rural counties. We have had multiple conversations with NV Energy. As you know, NV Energy is required to take care of their right-of-ways from a fire concern, but also has a vested interest in doing so, as fires that roll through there actually affect their infrastructure and costs a lot of money to get that back up and running and ensure that there's power to their constituents. So the more work that we can do, not just in their right-of-ways, but taking the work that we do in their right-of-ways and expanding that into community protection was the point of SB 508 matching funds. So we're looking at what NV Energy is required to do and how we can build off of that to actually make a community fire break or a fire break for sage-grouse habitat or whatever our intent or goal of the project is, to ensure both protection of infrastructure, not just NV Energy's, but homes, and also protection of the ecosystems in which we're trying to work. So we do anticipate that this contract with NV Energy will continue beyond 22-23 at the current level, whether we have 508 funds in the future to match or not. NV Energy, none of these projects that we do are forever, unfortunately. They last a little bit longer in our high elevation forested stands, but in our lower elevation rangelands, they're almost on an annual basis of maintenance. And so everything that we're doing right now, we've treated about 4,000 acres to date. We've got multiple entities under contract to continue that work. And so we've been doing a lot of prep work on getting the plans in place and the people in place to do the work. And so we do have a lot of that going currently, and we anticipate that to continue. That was one of the conversations we had with NV Energy before we decided to put permanent positions in, was trying to determine the longevity of those positions.
Thank you very much for that clarification. And I also, there are multiple Senate bills. So I believe it was Senate Bill 329 related to NV Energy's disaster response planning that is helping to contribute to some of this collaboration as well. And so it sounds like even without the matching funds, NV Energy's plans and activities and investments under those plans can support these positions for the somewhat foreseeable future. And I think you touched on this at the end of your last response, but if something happens and this NV Energy contract and funding terminates, there's not another funding source identified to continue to support these permanent positions. If that happens at some point, is that correct? We'd have to identify a new source.
Thank you for the question, Assemblyman Watts. Again, for the record, Casey, yes, that's correct. We would have to identify other grant funding sources or seek state funding if we felt that the need for those positions continued beyond the partnership with NV Energy.
All right. Well, thank you for that clarification. And it's good to hear that it seems like at least for the next biennium, we have a plan in place to ensure that those positions are funded. Those were the questions that I had, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblyman. Assemblywoman Titus.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So thank you for the presentation, and thank you for trying to somewhat limit our terrible wildfire situations. I'm going back to the contract with NV Energy and the $5 million that we allocated under SB 508. My question was going to be how many acres were actually treated, and I believe you said you've treated 4,000 acres so far, or been involved in 4,000 acres of. Is that correct?
Thank you for the question, Assemblywoman Titus. Again, for the record, Casey, yes, We've treated about just over 4,000 acres to date, but we've contracted for a much larger amount. Part of the initial buildup of these contracts was getting the personnel in place, not only for the division, but also for the local government entities that are now under contract. I didn't bring the statistics with me, and I had them, but I should have. But I can provide them to you in a more specific form today. But part of it was building up also the assets at local government to ensure one, additional fire response when necessary, but also they are working solely as resource crews to do this work from local government's perspective. So it took us time to get the apparatus and the personnel hired at the local government entity. They stole a lot of our good employees. Happy for them, bummed for me. But it actually really is a good partnership, and hopefully a sustainable partnership as we move forward, that gave us both fire suppression assets and natural resource assets as we move forward.
Thank you for that. I was doing the math, and that actually came out to just about $2,500 per acre of that. If only 4,000 was treated for $10 million. To me, that wasn't very productive. So you're assuring me that within that $10 million, there's still going to be more acreage treated?
Yes, thank you for the question, Assemblywoman Titus. Again, for the record, Casey, significantly more acreage. We've got under contract probably closer to 50,000 to 100,000 acres. The 4,000 acres, if we looked at the costs to date, have been insignificant. Most of the costs have been spent in just planning. I bet from the division standpoint, we're just under $100,000 of expenditures.
Follow up, Madam Chair, one last question, please.
Yes, please.
So I think that's where I'm really going with this, and you use the term that actually treatment of the 4,000 acres was insignificant. It's really about building up to it. And that's the question I had about these 3 foresters that were hired. They're not actually going to be pulling up brush or doing any fire mitigation. They're just going to be more of a planning and assisting others on where to treat and what to do. They're not actually getting their hands dirty. Question?
Thank you for the question again, Assemblywoman Titus. For the record, Casey, they will actually be getting their hands dirty and their feet and their shoes. They will be out there in the field with everyone else. Their job is to plan. So they write the plans, they get all the cultural and sensitive species clearances. We make sure that we're working with our partners at NDOW to ensure that we're looking at habitat in addition to fuel reduction. All of those types of things, we're working with ag on noxious weeds as we plan for these projects. But they are also out there, they're hauling the chippers out there or the masticators or whatever the equipment is. And oftentimes they're the ones running that equipment. So
Great. Thank you for that. I just want to make sure that there's an understanding that this is an ongoing process. This stuff grows back. In 5 years, it's going to be the same problem. So I appreciate all that you're doing. And it's going to take a lot of effort and continual effort to replan our state. So thank you very much for what you're doing. Thank you, Madam Chair, for the question.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. Next up, we have Senator Brooks.
Thank you, Chair Miller. My question's on E805, that new education information officer position. You described what that position would do. Can you just go into it, just briefly describe what the benefits of having this new position would be?
Yes, thank you for the question, Senator Brooks. Again, for the record, Casey. The benefits of this type of position, as you know, they're twofold. One, as I had stated earlier, the state of Nevada owns about, I think it's less than 1% of the land base from a jurisdictional percentage in the state. By contract with local government entities, we're just under 11%. The federal agencies own about 85%. With our fires increasing, we saw a huge increase in human starts this year. Part of the issue is getting that education and awareness out. So we need somebody who has the expertise, both in natural resource management and fire management, to help us get the word out on what the programs we have to offer that can assist communities in reducing their risk, also assist counties in reducing their risk. So we have programs such as where we provide equipment and supplies to volunteer fire departments and county fire departments in order to reduce risk. We're looking at fuel reduction projects. We're looking at infectious disease projects. So getting that education out there on a consistent basis so that people understand that we are here to help and there's money sometimes available for that assistance. If no money is available, we do have the ability to provide the technical assistance. And then during actual emergency response, it's critical that we have a person qualified to give accurate and timely information on things like road closures in areas where that is within our jurisdiction and we're responsible for pushing the information to the media and to the constituents. So it's critical, and getting out information on acres treated and what we've done to date in areas where we may have reduced risk, so that you all also are aware of the things that we have accomplished with the money that you support.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. And we have one final question on E681, if that's okay. Assemblywoman Peters.
Thank you, Chair, and I'll keep it brief. I'm just curious if you can describe the impact of the reduced uniform allowance on personnel and operations.
Thank you for the question, Assemblywoman Peters. Again, for the record, Casey. There is an impact. The uniforms that we're speaking of in this direct E681 are the uniforms like you see me wearing. They're the agency uniforms worn by field staff. We did reduce our uniform budget last year completely in order to try to meet cuts without trying to lay off staff. But as we looked at what we historically give back in uniform allowance, this is not a PPE allowance for firefighting personnel. We will speak to that in a minute in budget account 4196, but this is simply the agency identifying uniform allowance. So we were hopeful that with this cut, this is a much smaller cut. It's about half of the budget account, so that people could, because they were out last year, could replace some of the things that are necessary to be replaced in order to have an identifying outfit out there in the field.
Just follow up, just real quick. When you talk about the uniform, do you also include the pants, or are employees expected to provide their own pants just in a specific color and style?
Thank you for the question. Again, for the record, Casey, we provide shirts, pants, jackets, hats, shoes, all of the things that are necessary for both the employee safety and for the identification for the employees that are given a uniform allowance. So everything's within that allowance that's necessary. When we get to budget account 4196, all of the personal protective gear for wildland firefighters is also provided.
Thank you. And for some context, I'm asking because the counties do not provide pants. County identified rangers they buy their own pants.
Okay, thank you, Assemblywoman. All right, with that, I think we're ready to move on to the next budget.
Okay, the next budget is budget account 4196. This is our emergency suppression account, which is primarily for fire suppression, but as stated in a little earlier, we do actually provide assistance for other natural resource or natural disasters by request from other agencies who have that responsibility. So this emergency response account to wildland fires also includes the movement of local government assets to ensure that the closest available forces aggressively fight fires in and out of Nevada. So this was something that kind of came out of the interim committee for the wildfire study. And we have moved that from the Department of Emergency Management back into the Division of Forestry. This particular account is funded by general fund and wildland fire suppression reimbursements. I'm sure you've seen multiple times me coming before you for additional requests for funds. It's an interesting account. We're funded at a base level based on a 5-year historic average of response, minus reimbursements that we get from the federal agencies. And so, but because those reimbursements take time, I'm often before you asking for funds, and then those funds are reimbursed at a later date or in a future biennia. The enhancements in this budget account this time is a reduction to the wildland fire personal protective equipment by $286,000. Our annual fee or price for this personal protective equipment is just over $1 million. We felt that when we looked at, so just so you guys understand how we do this, these items are replaced based on a useful life of the equipment or the personal protective gear. And we have them in stock in warehouses. Our primary warehouse is in the southern portion of the state at Three Lakes Valley Conservation Camp. And we move that stock around based on need. But we also have a smaller warehouse up here at Eastern Sierra to stock those goods. So we believed that with the stock that we currently have on hand, we would be able to manage without this. However, did put a qualifier in there when we submitted this for budget reductions to meet the request to meet these reductions, that if it was necessary for firefighter safety to replace additional equipment, we would come back and request contingency funds as we have done in the past. In addition, we have a supplemental appropriation request, which is not uncommon for us during the legislative session, as we aren't able to access contingency funds during this time. There is a big round number of $10 million sitting before you for this supplemental. As of yesterday, our future liability is much less than that $10 million. It's about just under $3 million, $2.9 million at our best and most accurate figures today. These are based on some assumptions. We're assuming that about $3.2 million in revenue will be received in this fiscal year from bills that we've submitted to our federal, state, and local government partners, and that some of our FMAG, so the Fire Management Assistance grants that we get through FEMA, that help us support the state and local government fire costs for some of these fires, will get reimbursed in this fiscal year. So as you know, this as we come to hearing, we'll have a better understanding on this supplemental of exactly what will be necessary for that in the future. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions on budget account 4196.
Okay, thank you for this. Actually, I would like to ask a question about something that you just commented on about some of the FEMA reimbursements. And as I'm learning more about this, I'm learning that it can take up to 2 years to get some of these federal reimbursements. So I'm wondering, you say that we're expecting this reimbursement, I believe it was, did the slide say 10 million? But is there any other maybe reimbursements, if it does take up to 2 years, that we may be in the queue for any additional money coming during the next biennium?
Thank you for the question, Chair Miller. Again, for the record, Casey. So just to clarify, the 10 million is the potential need for contingency that we might need the state to provide in order to pay our bills. Okay. I think our future liability is much less than that 10 million. That's about 3 million. That's assuming that we get about $3.2 million in reimbursements. And we're constantly looking at these spreadsheets. We're providing them every time we come before you with contingency assets. And we only put the assumptions in there that we really think we're going to bring in this year. So this is what causes, volatile fluctuations in this budget account, because sometimes we do get paid much earlier. I will say our federal partners, we have been working with them on a quicker reimbursement process. And so whereas before we were sitting on bills sometimes for 5 years and cost share agreements up to 5 years, we're current as of last year's fires, and we're getting those moved a lot quicker. And that's a testament to our fire billing unit and the 4 staff that we have in there and the constant communication with our partners. So we're pretty confident that we will get this $3.2 million in reimbursement this year. Our outstanding future FMAG reimbursements is about $5.7 million. but we don't anticipate that in this year, as those FMAGs were new as of this year, and we do anticipate that being probably reimbursed in the next year.
Okay, thank you for that, because I think, I would believe we all share concerns about making sure that we're fully equipped and staffed and prepared for what I'll say is the next forest fire, because we know here in Nevada, it's just something that we're afflicted with. So I know that I have other members with questions and concerns about this as well. And yeah, because the fires were, I want to make sure we save as many homes and as much natural land and as many people as possible. So next question from Assemblywoman Tolles.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and thanks for all that you're doing. I know that we're anticipating, or we're budgeting 286,000 in each year of reducing our operating supply expenditures by 286,000 for each year. And I know you said that oftentimes we have to come back to IFC to backfill that, but I'm just wondering, what is the anticipated impact on operations as a result of those, if between the time we come back to IFC to backfill that?
Thank you for the question, Assemblywoman Tolles. Again, for the record, Casey. We don't anticipate any operating impacts from the, well, I mean, I guess we could, but our goal is to always ensure that our staff leave if they are going on initial attack or extended attack. They will not leave without the proper PPE and the equipment to safely do their job. And so we would make emergency purchases and then come back to reimburse those. As I stated earlier, our overall reimbursement is just over $1 million for that type of PPE, and with stock on hand, we think we can cover this shortage without huge impacts this year. Though if we did see those, we would be looking forward. So we've been watching our stock levels. We're making sure that we aren't getting behind. So as we start to see something like, let's say, our Nomex pants or our Nomex shirts, which protect firefighters when they're in direct contact with heat, if we're getting low on those, we actually are going to be looking for that contingency ask ahead of time. So we're trying to plan ahead and make sure that we don't see any impacts from our response in this future 22-23 biennium.
And thank you for that forethought and management. And if I may, Madam Chair, ask a follow-up. Thank you. So I had this question on Tuesday for our state fire marshal, because as many of the districts across the state, mine backs up to BLM miles and miles, and we've had 63 homes destroyed or damaged in the last 10 years in the neighborhood, and because it backs up to that BLM. And so you could help me understand the fire detection methods that we're currently using, and where does that fall in to the budget in terms of equipment, things like fire detection cameras or other ways that we're detecting that a wildfire has started and is rapidly approaching a populated area.
Thank you for the question, Assemblywoman Tolles. Again, for the record, Casey. Yeah, we have multiple methods of detection. Primarily, you spoke to one, the wildland fire cameras. Because we are so largely owned by federal agencies in the state, they have put up a lot of cameras throughout the state using our infrastructure. We worked with NV Energy also installing some of those cameras. So some of the funding in our SB 508 and NV Energy contract will go to installation of cameras. We looked at the infrastructure. Part of the cost savings in putting those cameras up is areas where we have radio repeaters or weather stations throughout the state already existing. They can use those same towers to put those cameras up. So we're constantly in communication with the University of Nevada, Reno, seismology lab, who's been primarily putting these cameras out there, and our federal, state, and local government partners, and NV Energy and non-traditional partners, to ensure that we've got good coverage around the state, that we're putting them up in the right places. So that's one method of detection, highly effective when you're looking at those are accessible to the public, not just to our dispatch centers. So we have 5 interagency wildland fire dispatch centers throughout the state, 2 of which the Division of Forestry owns, 3 of which are federally run and owned, but we have staff in all of them. And so when we're looking at those, our dispatchers are constantly watching those cameras, seeing if they see a start, but so is the public, and the public has caught many of those starts. In addition to that, you're always reliant on local government 911 centers and the call in from anyone who sees a fire. What's nice about a fire camera, so when what helps us in detection is oftentimes people are traveling through, or even people who have grown up here like myself are kind of challenged to know which range you might be looking at, or sometimes which direction I'm pointing, all of those things. So when they're calling into 911, that information is not always accurate. So what's really nice is if that information, the 911 center gets this information, they go immediately to a fire camera. All of us fire agencies have the ability to turn those cameras in 360 direction to see where we might see flames or smoke. And then we know exactly where that is, and can look at it and see maybe even the rates of spread and how we might know that area. And so it might actually help us to send what we send in initial attack as well. So we have multiple methods of detection, and all of those things have to kind of work concurrently to make the response happen. So local government is the first response, usually to most of these fires, it's within their jurisdiction. Concurrently, federal, if these fires start on federal or state lands, and or may be impacting those, or may impact those in the future, we might be sending a response as well.
Okay, thank you so much, and thank you, Chair, for the questions.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. Next, we have Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is around the base budget expenditures. And during the 2019 legislature, there was an approved new methodology for how to fund fire suppression costs. And my question is, could you just confirm that the base budget for personnel, fire suppression, and prior year's cost categories should be adjusted to align with the budgeting that was approved, the budgeting methodology that was approved by the 2019 legislature based on the 5-year averages adjusted for the costs supported with one-time funding?
Thank you for the question, Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno. Again, for the record, Casey, yes, we have been working with LCB staff on that. As submitted by the agency, we use the methodology. And so we do believe it should be adjusted to the 5-year average. For this type of budget account with so much fluctuation, it's really the only way we know of to give a best estimate of what the expenses may be going into the future, knowing that we may have a larger fire season than anticipated or a smaller fire season than anticipated and need more or carry forward more based on that. But yes, we agree that it should be adjusted, and we have been working with both LCB and GFO on that adjustment.
Thank you, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. And with that, we have a final question from Assemblywoman Titus.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Quick question. Early on in this presentation for this particular budget, you mentioned that you moved a fund, this fund that was originally in the Department of Emergency Management back to the Forestry Department. We know that our Department of Emergency Management is now going to be under the umbrella of our Department of Military here in the state. Are there other budgets that are going to come back to you? And did you move it back because of that move to the Military Department?
Thank you for the question, Assemblywoman Titus. Again, for the record, Casey. No, I don't think at the time of the move or the discussion of the move. So I will say it didn't come with a budget move. It came with a shift of duties. So this is the mutual aid response and the response of local government to ensure that we are dispatching the closest available resources to wildland fires primarily. There are other things that we dispatch when federally declared or like say for the COVID crisis, we have dispatched local government paramedics to other states to help give shots through this also. So this move came, it was actually brought on by two things. One, a request from LCB and GFO to look at the expenditures in both emergency response accounts. So where we had 24-hour dispatchers on for wildland firefighting, NDEM also had dispatchers on for wildland firefighting assets. And so we were asked to look at a consolidation there. In addition, our federal partners, though we oftentimes are angry, sometimes, at them, not really. One of the things that they were doing for us in fire management was using a reciprocal fire act agreement, which really was basically for those entities, like a local government entity and a local, like the Humboldt-Toyabe say, if you had direct adjacent ownership, it meant that any entity, you didn't have to call each other to respond. If you guys thought that this was going to be a threat, then you directly responded. They were using those agreements to send those assets out of state and around the state. And so an audit at the federal level actually found that for federal fires, that's okay. But for other state fires, that was not really the best use of the federal funds to play the banker on those such fires. So they came to the state and we worked with the governor's office to see if this was something that we could then help as it would affect the initial attack on our fire. So it was our goal to ensure that we had closest available forces, which includes local government as the first responders, and that we were dispatching things quickly to try to get fires out within that first 24 hours. So that's what has shifted back to us is a portion of that mutual aid response for local government. And we are working currently with the fire districts and our federal partners on how that's going to work, either through our dispatch centers or with our duty officers. And then that out-of-state response as necessary to help our neighbors as when we need them to help us. We rely on that as well.
Thank you. Thank you for that. You used a term that I'm very fond of, and it's called consolidation, and not duplication of services, making sure you can get your job done and not kind of wasting or have everybody in their own silo. So thank you for that. Thank you, Madam Chair, for the question.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. And with that, we can move on to the next budget. And for the sake of time, I'm going to ask members that we keep our questions concise and also our responses concise, please.
That was hard for me. Okay, the next budget account we will go through is budget account 4198. This is our conservation camp program. As you are aware, this is a partnership with the Nevada Department of Corrections that provides inmate work crews, national level firefighter and natural resource training and certifications to reduce recidivism rates in Nevada prisons while implementing natural resource protection, including wildland fire response in Nevada. This budget account supports 93 full-time employees, 13 of which are held for budget reductions at this time, and we'll go into that in a minute. This budget account is funded primarily, it's a general fund revenue split of about 70-30. 70% general fund, 30% revenue from projects the camps implement. You'll see some minuses more than pluses in the budget account this year. The pluses are our replacement equipment, as we talked about in earlier budget accounts, software, hardware, chainsaws, stuff necessary to implement, and deferred maintenance projects. We have 9 of these conservation camps around the state, and the facilities are in varying degrees of really old to somewhat new. And so there's always projects that need to be done. We held, though this says 12, it's actually 13 because we adjusted, though we held 11 crew supervisors and 1 camp supervisor. We recognized that we needed to hire this camp supervisor. It had been vacant for over a year, held in the earlier budget cuts, and we had an acting in at a +5 for almost a year. So we needed to actually hire this position, not only for leadership, but also, so we traded 2 other crew supervisors, which is how you get to the 13 that became vacant since we proposed these reductions in order to hire the camp supervisor. We also had a reduction in uniform allowance in this budget account. And this is the budget account in which I already spoke to on the transfer out of one position to fund the education and information officer in budget account 4195. And with that, I would be happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you. My first question would be, I have concerns whenever we're discussing reducing training, especially when, you know, this training, I assume, could be connected specifically to life-saving training, life-saving measures. And so when we're talking about the reduction of training and the savings, is this the offset because of the held positions, or are we reducing the amount or the type of training that's being received?
Thank you for the question, Chair Miller. Again, for the record, Casey. It's a reduction in training to offset the positions being held vacant. In addition, if there is training that is necessary, we do have grants that are funded through the Forest Service. So we were hoping to be able to temporarily offset any mandatory training if necessary above and beyond with our federal grant funds.
Okay, but our employees and inmates, the whole crew, they will still receive the necessary training that they need.
Yeah, thanks for the follow-up. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Senator Gokachia?
Madam Chair, and I'll be brief. I'm very concerned about the reduction in those vacant positions, especially with the closure of the White Pine County Honor Camp. There's a huge void in Eastern Nevada. You've got a lot of resource work booked that isn't getting accomplished, and especially fuel reductions on right-of-ways and fire breaks. Just how big an impact is it going to be, Casey?
Senator, we didn't hear that last part.
How big an impact will it be?
Thank you for the question, Senator Gokachia. Again, for the record, Casey. This is going to impact our ability to get work completed on the ground. And when we submitted the reductions, we knew that. When we made this decision, it was based on looking at the budget account and historic averages of about 10 vacancies in this budget account per year. So this isn't a huger than that reduction. Historically, because these are entry-level positions, we tend to run about 10 vacancies in this budget account every year, almost all the time. And so, but this will reduce our ability to send crews out. It will also reduce our ability to have the wildland fire response we've historically seen. However, it was tough for all of us to make those budget cuts. But when you are looking at the possibility of having to lay people off or cut the vacant positions that were sitting there vacant, that's what our choice was.
Okay, thank you for that. Senator Dennis?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to follow up to your question. There's a couple ways that you're trying to create some savings, and one is through the uniform allowance, and you're doing a savings, I believe. It's 109,000 general savings fund, but and you've indicated that if they that they might have to wait, keep their uniforms longer, but if they need to replace it, they might have to do that on their own. But NRS 281-121 requires the uniform, so they're still going to end up having to get that uniform, right? So there probably won't be as big a savings as being budgeted. Is that correct?
Thank you for the question, Senator Dennis. Again, for the record, Casey. We do anticipate that this saving will be realized. It's the general fund has been taken. If there's a need for people to replace uniforms, but because they actually need the uniform, we would look at salary saving or operating savings in other portions of the budget account and get the approval to move that money to cover what we might need in uniforms. So we will look at that if it's necessary. We do need to provide the uniforms. Part of the reason we looked at uniforms as a savings was looking at historical, what we have sent back and what we actually spend in uniform budgets every year. So it's about 50% of what we send back. So we looked at that to make sure that these were reasonable in what we were providing for cuts.
Thank you. And just as a follow-up, so to the chair's question on the training, you're going to do the mandatory stuff, but the other training you're not going to do. And is that going to have what kind of impact does that create for you if you're not doing those other trainings?
Thank you, Senator Dennis. Again, for the record, Casey. We will provide all mandatory training. We can't send fire crews out without that training. They would not be qualified per the standard that we adhere to. We will still provide the training, the other trainings that we can in natural resource management. The goal of trying to get these inmates trained to a level where then when they return to the outside, they could get a job in this, and they do. And oftentimes what we see them going into more often than firefighting, though we do see that, is into the tree care industry. So we will continue to provide that. This cut was intended to be commensurate with the amount of staff we were reducing in the budget account. So our hope is to continue all mandatory and non-mandatory training for the staff that still exists. And like I said, we do have some grant funding to assist with that, though temporary, through this biennium.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator. And with that, I see no additional questions for this budget. I think we're ready to move on to the next one.
Okay, the next one is budget account 4194, our Wildland Fire Protection Program budget account. This budget account is for wildland fire prevention, mitigation, and suppression in cooperation with local government. This budget account supports 15 full-time positions, primarily firefighters, and 24 seasonal firefighter positions, including dispatchers in our interagency dispatch centers. This is fully funded by county participation fees in the Wildland Fire Protection Program. There are no enhancements in this budget account, so I'm just going to give a brief overview of where we are with this. Our goal, as we have said many times going into this Wildland Fire Protection Program, was full participation across the state. We are very, very close to that at about 95% participation in jurisdictions. Our non-participants primarily lie in Clark County, Mineral County, and a portion of General Lyon that does not have a fire protection district responsible for that response. And really, because of the transfer of the new state park, it falls under the Division of Forestry for response. Last biennium, as you know, I presented that we had changed the formula since the inception of this program. We had based participation fees on professional understanding of fire risk and cost in these jurisdictions, but we did not have a formula to back that. Last year, we worked with the participating entities and did create a formula based on wildfire risk, occurrence of wildfire in their jurisdiction, on the lands, on the state and private lands and county lands for which they are jurisdictionally responsible. That excludes the federal and state lands within their jurisdictions, the values at risk, and the unreimbursed cost to the state on behalf of that jurisdictional entity. So it was a slightly complicated discussion, but we all came to agreement that all of the data that we had created to create this formula was the best that we had at the time and is the best continuing forward. We reran our numbers for the 22-23 contracts. We do not anticipate, as you might remember in the last biennia, because of this formula being put in place, some entities, primarily Elko County and Humboldt County, who have a lot of private land, who have large fire occurrence and large fire risk, their portion of the buy-in to the program increased significantly. So we were trying to incrementally increase them up to the current buy-in rate. We do not anticipate having anybody at an incremental rate this year. Everyone will be bought in full or opt out of the program. We did present the run of the 22-23 numbers to the Wildfire Protection Program Committee, which consists of non-participating entities and participating entities, including Elko and Clark County. to ensure full participation. We presented this last week. I do believe we're going to see I think we're going to see everyone stay who's currently in. And I think the increases we'll see this year are Clark County Fire Protection District, Moapa, and Mount Charleston. So we do anticipate increased participation based on the current formula and risk and cost to the state. So with that, I would be happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you. I believe Assemblyman Watts has a few questions.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So just looking at some of the details about this program and how it's operated in the past, it seems like previously the costs of the incident responses have exceeded the assessments paid by participants at times. So I was just wondering if the annual revenue target for this program for the biennium is appropriate given how that dynamics played out previously.
Thank you for the question, Assemblyman Watts. Again, for the record, Casey. The goal of the program was to help provide local government with a more sustainable budget process for wildland fire. It's obviously increasing across the state, and it's very hard for local jurisdictions to budget for the up and down of fire seasons. And so the participation rate, this gets a little complicated. These funds actually fund NDF's firefighters. So that is what the participation rate has been, the cap of the rate has been set at what the division needs to pull in to pay for our firefighters. And then the costs of the fire have come out of budget account 4196. So, but we do believe that it's a fair rate. I don't think our intent was ever to have them pay fully for those fire costs. It's a partnership. We all have to work together. And I don't think local government could ever budget appropriately for the fire seasons that they're seeing. So we may look at that if we are ever successful in getting the swap of a general funded fire service, as our fire response should not be, does not necessitate, it's hard, it doesn't fluctuate based on participation. It's necessary to be an interagency partner with that amount of staff, whether we have Elko participating or not. What does fluctuate is if say Elko County decides to opt out of the program, then Elko County would then be responsible for paying for all their own fire bills, negotiating land use agreements when the fire is on their land, all of the things that we're doing for them on their behalf. And so we continue to try to make that swap of general fund funding our firefighting forces so that does not fluctuate, and the county participation fees going into 4196 to actually pay and offset the fire costs for the state, which is where they'd be more appropriately put.
Thank you for that. On that note, and I think you mentioned that it seems like everyone's going to continue participating. Do you expect any increase in participation over the upcoming biennium in this program?
Thank you for the question, Assemblyman Watts. Again, for the record, Casey, yes, we spoke to Clark County. We put them specifically, Clark County Fire Protection District, on the committee that helped us formulate the formula so that we could try to ensure that they had some buy-in to the process. I do believe we're going to see Clark County Fire Protection District join. If Clark County joins, we believe Moapa and Mount Charleston will also join because they're all under the same board of directors. We do not anticipate Boulder City participating as their fire risk is fairly low. General Lyon, again, doesn't have a fire protection district that would necessitate a buy-in, and we don't anticipate Mineral County. So we would be closer to about 98% participation. Though Mineral County may come in with the movement of assets off district. So that's still something we are constantly working with them on.
Great, thank you for that. And I have one last question, if I may, briefly on the reserves. And I was just wondering if you could explain, and maybe this is also again related to the formula, which I understand is complicated. Why did you decide to reduce the reserve in this budget with decreased assessments to the participants instead of transferring excess funding to the fire suppression budget to support incident response costs?
Thank you for the question again, Assemblyman Watts. For the record, Casey. Our determination for reducing the assessments this year was trying to get the counties that we were incrementally increasing to an increased level, but continue that participation for them. And so with ensuring everyone was paying at full rate. So we looked at, and because those reserves are carried forward for fire staff, we were looking at the reduction of those and the reduction of the overall cost, because we didn't need to bring in quite as much because we had those reserves in excess. We could have transferred them over to pay fire bills as well. We have done that historically, but then replaced them as money has come in response as the funds are brought in to pay for the fire staff. So our goal was to ensure that we got full participation or near full participation, and still kind of created a sliding scale for those who Elko County, for example, in the current formula would come in at just over 800,000. I think it's 828. But their full buy-in rate's 1.1. So this would give them that sliding scale. We understand that for some counties during the time of COVID, just like for the state, they're severely impacted in their ability to increase their budget accounts for this type of service. And they would be coming back to the state for fire suppression should they take this on themselves. We believe it's better to have an agency making sure that the best interest in cost is ensured. So we have staff on all the fires making sure that the costs are contained as best they can be, and that we're looking at those types of things. Things are moved on and off appropriately for cost containment. So we believe that providing that service to local government is something that's important as a partner going forward.
Thank you. And just very quickly to summarize, so essentially the decision was made given the budget challenges that many local governments are facing, and to try and ensure that we get that maximum participation rate that you were describing previously.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Ms. Casey. Thank you, Madam Chair, for the questions.
Thank you, Assemblyman. And seeing no other questions on this budget, we can move on to our final budget. Our final budget on forestry.
Yes, it's very complicated to have 5 budgets. So our final budget is my favorite. It's where I started in the division. So this is our budget account 4235, our nursery, seed bank, and forest products programs. The purpose of this budget account is to provide conservation plant materials for restoration, fire rehabilitation, and habitat enhancement projects, and increase the utilization of forest byproducts as we're doing these large landscape scale projects. We have very little industry within the state of Nevada, so we're constantly trying to create that industry to support the offset of the project costs. This budget account supports 4 full-time positions and 2 seasonal positions at our state tree nurseries, 1 in Washoe Valley, 1 in Las Vegas. And it is fully funded by revenue generated from these programs and product sales. There's no general fund in this budget account. If we move to the enhancements this year, all of these enhancements, the division was tasked with looking at a strategic plan for the viability, the long-term viability of all 3 programs under this budget account. And we did that last year for the nursery. So we looked at how were we going to be able to sustain sales in both seed and conservation equipment or conservation plant materials over the long term. As with many of our programs, we are running very old equipment in old facilities. And so that became our priority, was to replace some of this equipment with reserves in order to increase efficiencies. So the enhancements you see here are primarily to replace our forklift. Is 24 years old and it is actually non-operational. So currently when we get deliveries of large seed or propagation materials such as soil or soil amendments, they're delivered on pallets, and right now we're having to hand undo the pallets and move each one of those things into a facility to secure it until we use it. It's highly intensive in labor, and so our goal is to get a forklift that works so we can move these things more efficiently. The second one, an E720, is a dump trailer. This is actually in the Las Vegas nursery. It replaces a non-operational dump truck. Our dump truck has been non-operational since 2019, so we've been trying to move things around the nursery with, again, labor, and it's highly intensive. Our dump truck was 31 years old. So what we are hoping is the trailer will provide some efficiencies in, it takes a lot less to maintain a trailer than it does a vehicle with an engine and all of those things. Plus, it's a little more movable around our facilities, so we can move in and out of areas we were unable to do with the dump truck. This moves soils and plant materials and all of the things that we use to plant the plants around the Las Vegas facility. Our Las Vegas facility is much larger than our Washoe nursery as far as growing capacity, and it is what provides a lot of the plants for the Washoe nursery, as it has a longer growing season as well for outside. So they produce a lot of the materials, and those get moved up for sale up here at the Washoe nursery. In addition, we're looking at soil mixers. Currently, we have a highly labor-intensive hand mixing process. It takes a multitude of things to mix soil to make sure that it holds enough water, but not too much water, has all the minerals and nutrients necessary to feed and sustain plants as they grow, so that we have a good quality product sold when we put it out there. Our hand mixing process does not allow for that soil to get mixed appropriately. So these two soil mixers will ensure that it's mixed appropriately. It will save us a lot of time in the labor-intensive personnel side, and hopefully will lower our cull rates over time. A lot of our death of plants is due to buildup of water or not the proper drainage of water due to the way we mix our soil. And so hopefully this will reduce the cull rate so we have more sales going forward. And with that, I would be happy to answer any questions.
Great. We have a few questions from Senator Brooks.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. My questions were on the deferred maintenance. Didn't really get into that, but given the delays in completing the previously approved deferred maintenance projects in this biennium, which projects is the agency going to go forward with? What will you be able to complete in this upcoming biennium?
Thank you for the question, Senator Brooks. Again, for the record, Casey. We have a backlog of deferred maintenance in this budget account. There were many of those things that have been pushed forward. As you know, we're kind of spot fire to spot fire with a lot of these things. We didn't anticipate a large wind taking out our greenhouse up here in the Washoe Valley. So that then took precedence over some of the other deferred maintenance projects that we had. So we had to immediately replace the cover or the skin on that greenhouse in order to help the survivability of the plants that were within, and for some growing contracts. So as with most of our deferred maintenance projects, we anticipate moving forward with all those required for life safety, making sure that we have the facilities appropriate for the products that we're producing out there. However, as things pop up, our well has gone bad a couple of years running. So as those issues tend to pop up, those tend to take priority. So we tend to push some of those deferred maintenance projects forward. Our goal is to get through the ones we provided that were life safety in the budget account. However, again, we would be looking at if something else popped up in the interim, then we'd have to move to that and then make sure that we asked first that be our priority, but then fix those things.
Thank you. And of the 55 deferred maintenance projects that are in this recommended budget, have a timeline of when you're going to complete those?
Thank you for the question. I don't off the top of my head, but I could get that to you. We could get you a list of the anticipated timelines for that. And then, as I said, those may adjust based on incidents that happen, but I could get that to you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And last question, where's your Las Vegas nursery operation?
Thank you for the question, Casey, again, for the record. It is in is it Floyd Lamb State Park? So it's not a state park anymore, it's a county park. So when you pull into the Floyd Lamb and you go past the ponds, we're around the corner and you wouldn't know we're there. And it used to be the outskirts of town. There wasn't homes directly adjacent and around it, but that's where the Las Vegas facility is.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Senator. With that, I don't see any additional questions right now, but Fire Warden Casey, I would just like to thank you for your presentation today and your thoroughness and your just utterly being prepared for every single question we have for you today. So thank you. You did a tremendous job today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I did have one more slide, if you don't mind, really quick.
Certainly, please.
And it was just a general slide to go back. I just wanted to briefly speak to the challenges that we faced, and I actually spoke to many of them earlier. But as we start to see a warming climate, we are seeing an increase in insect and disease outbreaks, wildfire occurrence, like I spoke to earlier. We're seeing an increase in homes in the wildland-urban interface, which is causing more catastrophic loss as we start to see these fires move through these ecosystems. And it is our goal to work with our partners, state, federal, and local entities to really increase, as I said earlier, not only our suppression response, but our natural resource management projects as collectively defined in these high priority areas. So our challenge is that, making sure that we're staffed and have the equipment in order to do that. So as you see, we're constantly shuffling and making hard decisions to make sure that we have staff trained both in wildland firefighting and natural resource management, that we have stable funding for these types of programs, and that we are actively engaged in the process with our partners. So we will continue to try to adjust those challenges. We have seen an influx of a few people leaving in the last couple months, and I meet with all of them as they leave on an exit interview to kind of discuss what we can do better. Some of them were fears of furlough or the effects of furlough, and so we were grateful that that did not move forward into the new biennia. But also what we're seeing is some frustration with our ability to be able to provide the resources necessary to safely do jobs. I've been before you many times asking for equipment. I last biennia asked for replacement of 5 vehicles that were over 250,000 miles and 30 years old, and I'm still running that equipment today. We unfortunately had to give that money back for budget reserves due to the COVID crisis, and we understood that. And now we're going to be running that equipment into this biennia again as we put it in, and it's not here. And so it's a challenge, and we understand that. We try to adjust based on these things and ensure that staff, so we are currently looking at how we can move equipment from some areas to other areas to make sure that staff have what they need. And I know I'm preaching to the choir. This is probably not just my issue, but many people's issues as we try to run agencies effectively and efficiently with lean budgets. So thank you again for your time today. And I'd be happy to answer any other questions if you have them going forward.
Thank you so much. Members, if you do have any additional questions, I'd appreciate if you could ask them offline. Just because we know that we're kind of moving into getting close to floor and such. And I want to make sure that we have just one last budget to cover from the Nevada Natural Heritage. So Ms. Zabo or Ziabo, please tell me how to say that. I want to make sure I'm saying your name correctly. How is your name pronounced?
Kristen Zabo.
Zabo, okay.
So Zabo as well. So
well, I want to make sure we have it correct. So Ms. Zabo, when you are ready, we are ready for you.
Okay, let me find the presentation.
I'll go to the one over to the left. Click that one. And then click on the presentation and click again.
Okay, thanks for your patience. I'm still unmuted, I'm assuming. Okay. So thank you, Chair Miller and members of the committee. I'm Kristen Zabo. I'm the administrator of the Nevada Division of Natural Heritage. And I'm pleased to be able to present a summary of our division and our budget for the next biennium. So the Division of Natural Heritage is a non-regulatory agency whose mission is to develop and maintain a cost-effective, centralized information source and inventory of the locations, biology, and conservation status of all imperiled plants and animals in Nevada. Natural heritage data are used by a variety of public and private entities early in the planning process to help minimize costly resource conflicts and to streamline federally mandated environmental reviews. The use of our data assists in quick, efficient, and informed land use planning and conservation planning decisions with the intention of striking a balance between economic development and species conservation. We have 8 full-time employees, all located here in Carson City. We are zoologists, botanists, ecologists, and data and database managers, passionate about Nevada's biodiversity and rare species. The division is a member of the NatureServe Network, which is an international network of similar programs throughout the US, Canada, and Latin America that provide the scientific basis for effective conservation action. The division's duties are outlined in NRS 232.1369, and as stated in that statute, we provide expertise in the areas of zoology, botany, and community ecology, including the study of wetland ecosystems, and we maintain data systems on the locations, biology, and conservation status of at-risk plants and animals. The location data tell us where the species occur. The biological information provides details about species' natural history and what was observed at each mapped location. And the conservation status provides a measure of extinction risk, allowing us to prioritize which species we should be concerned about and where to direct our focus. Our data are delivered to a variety of customers, and data are used primarily to help comply with environmental review requirements. We also serve as advisors to the State Forest or Fire Warden, providing unbiased scientific expertise on rare plant-related issues. We lead Nevada's wetland program and manage federal grants related to wetland program development. And we also manage several grants related to climate change, rare plant science, and community science. As I mentioned, natural heritage staff assess the conservation status of all species for their rarity and extinction risk. Conservation status assessments are conducted using standard methods to ensure species are ranked fairly, consistently, and using the best available scientific information. The result is a relatively straightforward 1 to 5 rank, or what we call S rank, S being for state, with the most imperiled taxa ranked as S1 and the most secure and abundant ranked as S5. Species ranked S1 to S3, so the critically imperiled, imperiled, and vulnerable species generally become our tracking priorities. And what that means in practice is that these species are our priorities for which we actively gather and maintain information. There are currently 637 species on our tracking list. The agency also maintains a watch list, and the watch list includes species that we want to keep on our radar, and we passively collect data for these, but they're not prioritized for tracking at this time. And we have 193 species currently on the watch list. Overall, we have more than 18,000 location records mapped in our database. In addition to the location, these records include all the supporting biological information received from the data source. And because of the rigorous methodology that we follow, the data are reliable, vetted, rooted in science and objectivity, and supported by documented references. Our staff is constantly adding information to this database, and this is important because a static data set would quickly become outdated and fail to meet environmental review requirements and conservation objectives. We compile our data from a variety of sources, including agency fieldwork, other state agencies, federal agencies, museum records, university studies, and published literature. We also maintain taxonomy, biological characteristics of all taxa, and for some species, we have evaluated their vulnerability to climate change. To give you a little bit more detail on data delivery, we provide data on request to other state agencies, federal agencies, tribes, private consultants, nonprofit organizations, and scientific researchers. Our largest data consumer is the Nevada Department of Transportation. We provide the Department of Transportation with on-demand data services to assist with environmental impact analyses that are required by federal laws, such as the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, and the Endangered Species Act. Having access to our database increases efficiencies within the Department of Transportation, particularly with the large number of routine road maintenance projects that they conduct. Other state and federal agencies use our data for environmental review, setting management priorities, and implementing best management practices on the landscape. The governor's recommended budget for the FY 22-23 biennium is $2,195,739. Most of the division's funding for personnel and operations is through a transfer from the Department of Transportation, and a transfer from the Division of Environmental Protection through a federal Department of Energy grant funds the remaining personnel expenses. NatureServe contributions fund special projects used to enhance Nevada biodiversity data, and database run sales are data request fees collected for certain data requests. And these fees are reverted to the Department of Transportation at the end of each fiscal year. We have 3 enhancements in the governor's recommended budget. I'll go through the second 2 quickly and talk a little more about the first. E710 is for equipment replacement according to the EATS computer equipment replacement schedule. And E800 is an adjustment to the director's office cost allocation, which is detailed in budget account 4150. E251 is a $200,000 general fund appropriation to support the Nevada Climate Initiative and inform the state climate strategy and statewide greenhouse gas emissions inventory and projections report. The agency requests that this funding be approved for use in both years of the biennium. Specifically, the funds would be used to understand carbon sequestration in natural lands, such as rangelands, grasslands, and wetlands. We know that carbon is stored in plants and healthy soils, and we could mitigate greenhouse gas emissions through carbon sequestration in healthy ecosystems. But the big question we need to answer is how much carbon can be stored in these different ecosystems. So with these funds, the Division of Natural Heritage would contract qualified scientists to begin to address this significant data gap and hopefully inform the greenhouse gas inventory and help Nevada meet its statewide greenhouse gas emission reduction goals. Before I conclude my presentation, I'd just like to point out one major ongoing challenge of the division. We have had difficulty for many years in increasing our technical capacity for our core work of maintaining biodiversity data, particularly in areas not covered by other state agencies, such as conducting inventories for rare plants, rare insects, and wetlands. Division staff capacity decreased during the Great Recession and has remained at 8 full-time employees since 2009. Yet our workload has steadily increased with the additional rare species to track, management of multiple grants, and work related to the Nevada Wetland Program and Nevada Climate Initiative. And that concludes my presentation. Thanks again for the opportunity to present a summary of our budget, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. We do have a few questions from Assemblywoman Peters.
Thank you, Chair. My first question has to do with the updating of the carbon flow data. I understand that Nevada's in a unique situation, and there's not great models out there that mimic our particular habitats. So if this recommended funding is approved, when does the agency anticipate incorporating that flow data into the state's annual greenhouse gas report?
Thank you for the question. Kristen Zabel for the record. So the plan is to start researching, the next steps to use this funding. So there's a couple different ways we can go. So we need to get the baseline data. So we either need to create a plan to create the baseline, find the baseline data, or we need to start funding projects to assemble this baseline data. I've had some initial conversations once the recommended budget came out and I saw that this was in there. I've spoken to UNR and our U.S. Climate Alliance. And so I know there's resources out there and ways to start. So it's just a matter of starting. So as far as getting actual data to inform these the inventory, it might be a little while because some of these research projects take time. But I do know that there is a current study that UNR is doing that might be able to provide some initial data sooner rather than later. So I hope that helps answer your question.
I think most entities are in that position when it comes to climate change vulnerability assessments and adaptation planning. I do encourage you to look at some of the tribal efforts that have been funded throughout the Southwest and New Mexico and Arizona. I'm sure that they have advanced some of this area for those high altitude deserts. I have a couple more questions, if I may, related to the contract funding, if that's okay, Chair?
Yes, please.
Can you just describe how the agency determined that $200,000 was an appropriate amount of funding for contracting the scientists for this data collection?
It just kind of seemed like a reasonable amount, to be quite honest. I just weren't quite sure, where to start or how we were going to start. So I have figured out in the last couple months after speaking to some UNR people that it does take about $50,000 to fund a graduate student for a year to do some, particular project that we're thinking about. So, that's about all I have to go on at this point.
I think that's fine. I mean, to be fair, when talking about developing a program like this, it is often taking a bite at a time, and $200,000 is not an unreasonable grant amount for a project like that, in my experience. But I do expect to see some increases in those rates as you guys develop the plan further. And can you just describe a little bit what your anticipated efforts or when those efforts will be completed? It sounds like it's kind of a fluctuating timeline right now, but do you have an idea of how long this process may take and when you hope to get data fully gathered together and really the carbon, like really an idea of where you're going to go with it in place?
Thanks for the question. Kristen Zabo for the record. Oh, that's a tough question. I would hope within the biennium, we would have some idea of, where we're going. I think it is really important to start with a plan, and having a strategic plan related to all of this would probably help me speak a little better about it all and give us a better timeline. And again, like you mentioned, it is one bite at a time. So I do anticipate this being an ongoing project per se.
At some point, I'd love to chat offline with you about what those efforts are looking like in other states and across the country, and see if I can help with some direction at all. But thank you for your responses.
Kristen Zabel for the record. Thank you very much. I welcome that conversation. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And finally, we have one brief comment from Assemblyman Watts.
Thank you so much for recognizing me, Madam Chair. And a little bit broader for the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, which is why I'm not asking you specifically to respond to this, Ms. Zabo, but just following up on a couple of things. One is you noted how important it is for your agency to really undertake some of the direct conservation work that's under your purview, and that work continues to grow. And of course, we know that given the kind of constraints with how the executive budget was put together, some difficult decisions have had to be made about what to prioritize. And I completely want to get more robust data to inform our carbon inventory and our climate plans. I know earlier we heard about plans to try and bring in additional funding to support that in the Division of Environmental Protection. We also heard in a previous meeting around, some of the decisions that were made around a position to manage the conservation bond program. And without funding that, it's keeping millions of dollars from getting out the door that can actually help get conservation work going and hopefully address some of our emissions directly. And there's also some sage grouse grants and conservation credit programs that can leverage matching dollars. So I just wanted to get out on the record that while I completely support these efforts overall, I just have some questions around some of the priorities of what we're deciding to move forward on immediately and what we're not. And again, since some of those are outside of the purview of your division, you don't have to respond, but I just wanted to raise that as well with the members, other members of this committee, and make it aware for the department as well.
And thank you for that, Assemblyman. And again, you're more than welcome to take that offline and respond offline as well, Ms. Sabo. With that, seeing no additional questions, I appreciate we've done actually a tremendous job of getting through so many budgets today. So we will close the presentations on our budget. And our one last item today before we adjourn is for public comment. So broadcasting, if you could please queue anyone up who's calling in, who's in line to make public comment. We'll give you a moment. And I just want to remind anyone calling in for public comment that you have 2 minutes each to make your comment.
Hello, Chair. This is Michael from Broadcast. I'm going to queue up our first caller. Hello, caller with the last 3 digits, 101. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin. Caller with the last 3 digits, 101. Please press *6 to unmute. Caller. Chair, this is Michael from Broadcast. Our one caller has dropped off the line. So our line is open and working. However, we have no callers.
Okay, let's give them another moment. I want to make sure that it was, if it was a drop because of technology or if it was somebody who had been waiting. Let's see if they call back in.
That's fine. I will let you know if someone pops back into the call.
Okay, thank you. Broadcasting, has anyone dialed back in?
Chair, this is Michael. The public comment line is open and working. However, we still have no callers at this time.
Okay, well, I'm glad we provided a few more moments to ensure we didn't miss anyone. But with that, not seeing anyone for public comment, again, I want to thank all the presenters today. You did a tremendous job of getting through a lot of material, and of course, all the members for asking the questions that, we're most intrigued and interested and curious about. So with that, I will go ahead and adjourn this meeting. Everyone have a great day.